to the Devy Devotional Podcast, a show devoted to college prospect evaluation with a fantasy football focus. With your hosts, John Arrington, Aaron Wilcox, and Andy Starr. This podcast brings you actionable strategies and player-driven analysis for your Devy, C2C, and Dynasty leagues. Let's dive in.
Let's dive into the rookies. Welcome to the Devy Devotional, where we stay devoted to Devy. I'm your host, John Arrington, joined by no one just yet, but I will be joined by someone in just a little bit. We got Andy Starr back tonight, and we are very happy about that. But tonight we're going to be diving back into the rookies. We've taken a little hiatus, went and did some C2C stuff, went and did some Devy stuff, but it's time to talk about the rookies, especially some of the ones that we haven't talked about nearly enough. Let's not hold you up anymore, and let's go ahead and bring Andy in. How are you doing, buddy?
Good. And you've now called on me so I can talk, and here I am, and I'm doing well. It is still cold here in Michigan, as you can tell. I'm all bundled up here in the basement, but you know what? It's finally going to warm up here shortly, but enough about the weather. I'm excited to talk some more rookies here. And maybe, tie a bow on this class finally. I've been telling you guys in our chat for weeks how I'm just so ready for this draft to be here. I can't hear any more hot takes on it. I can't do anything else beyond it. I feel like I've already seen the worst possible draft takes imaginable this year. I'm not sure that they can get any worse, but who knows? There's still, what do we have, like 3 more weeks till the draft? So, but I'm done with it. I'm ready to say our last piece on them and hopefully move on, and then we can maybe do some more talk once we learn some more information on landing spots and that sort of thing.
I'm with you. I get it. I think that's why we're talking about them again tonight, though, is that I guess we've been waiting for people to catch up. Obviously you have the film grinders who have to watch their 3 games from each year or whatever it is that they do, and whatever it might be, people have to go through their process. Some people start a lot later than us. We started talking about the rookies, January 2nd or whatever it was. And obviously we're talking about these players all throughout their college careers. But now that we're starting to get to the point where everyone's talked about the top 15, 20 guys over and over and over again, so everyone's getting bored with it. So now we're starting to hear this guy that is, that should be like a 5th round pick, is Jamar Chase, and this guy is the next this and that, and all these players are amazing. None of them are bad, and all that. And I think it's just we're getting to that point where people are trying to literally just be the first person to talk about some guy that most people have never heard of, and say, just in case that 1% chance he hits, I was the one that called that. I was the one that did that. And unfortunately, I think that's the part of the season that we're in. So yeah, Andy wasn't here last week for the Feist pod. I don't know, Andy, do you have any Feist that you need to get out? I don't know if you heard that one or not, but you got anything you got to get out of your system before we get into the rookies?
No, I haven't listened to it yet because we were on like a road trip last week. So it was like 2 days in one spot, and then drive 12 hours, and then 2 days in another spot and drive another 12 hours. So a lot of time on the road, which would seem like a good time to listen to podcasts, but for whatever reason, I don't do that when I'm driving. I just
maybe not with the family.
Yeah, well, the family's there; they got their stuff too. But I just, I'll just listen to the sounds of the road. I'm a weird driver. Like I'm fine with my thoughts, but no, I definitely will listen to it. And as far as like Feist that I need to get out right now, I don't think anything glaring. I think we're too early in the spring season to really have any definitive answers on any sort of position battles. So we've talked about guys returning that we're not too high on, and guys that we like. So I'm not too feisty just yet. Usually I get more feisty once the summer heat turns up a little bit. And,
it's too cold for you to be feisty. That's all it is.
The vitamin D up here. It's just I'm just holed up in my basement right now.
I guess you took the wrong vacation. You should have gone somewhere with a little more sun. But
Well, I was down south. I was in Florida, so I did get some sun for a little bit. So I was, in your neck of the woods, but it wasn't long enough apparently because, like I said, it was only a couple days in each spot.
yeah, that's rough when you're constantly moving, and especially 12-hour drives. That's a lot. That's probably where the feist went to the drives and yelling at the kids and all that kind of stuff. But like I said, we're going to be talking about the rookies, and I thought, what better time than to introduce my new tool that I created than now when we're talking about these rookies. I'm excited about this tool. It is something that's actually behind the paywall on my website. So this is not normal information that you can just get for free or whatever. However, tonight for the listeners, I'm willing to do that. So, uh, what what I built, I call it the Skyline Score, and essentially it is looking at the floor and the ceiling for players because all we do is, as analysts, as dynasty players, as everything is talk about the floor and the ceiling for players, and we say, this player ceiling is through the roof, and Anthony Richardson could be the QB1 overall for years to come if he just hits. Well, the problem is, and when people that were drafting him at 102, 103, whatever, they were completely dismissing the fact that he had no floor whatsoever. And so I think the point of the tool is to say you have to have a combination of both. Otherwise, like you can in the other realm, like you can have a player that has a great floor but they don't have much of a ceiling, and so for like a wide receiver, now you're looking at Khalil Shakir. There's nothing wrong with Khalil Shakir, but is he ever going to win you a league or do anything like that? No, most likely not. So, it doesn't always have to be, oh, I'm just looking at these players and saying, yeah, they have no floor, so they can't be anything. You can also look at players and say, they have a ton of floor, but they have no ceiling, or they have very little ceiling. And so, what's the point of drafting them early? Because they're not going to win me a league. They're not going to change my team drastically or anything like that. That's when you probably want to be taking those kind of players maybe a little bit later, second, third, fourth rounds of rookie drafts, things like that. So everyone always talks about ceiling and floor, all that kind of stuff. But I don't know that we ever truly like combine it and say, is this player the full combination? Is this player the full Monty? And so that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to create a tool to where we can actually say that. And I created Skyline Score, which I'm about to bring up onto the screen. There we go. And hopefully you guys can see that. I'll zoom in a little bit more. But essentially, this is the QBs. You'll see them swaying back and forth. Some of the players, it's supposed to it's supposed to be like a skyline, like a tower, or like a skyscraper. And obviously, the ones with the lower floors, they're leaning over a little bit. They're not doing too great. But essentially, for all of these, but for all these players, for the QBs, for the wide receivers, for everyone. Sorry, I'm trying to find something on my other screen. Essentially, I'm looking for floor and ceiling. For the floor for QBs, you're talking about how many games have you played. You're talking about the passing yards per game. You're looking at the completion rate. You're looking at interception rate. Things like that they're going to be. Do you have the floor to be an NFL QB? For ceiling, for the QBs, you're looking at big time throw rate, intended air yards. How far are you pushing the ball down the field? How far, or how many big time throws are you making, or how often are you making big time throws while pushing the ball down the field? Your run game, are you a rushing quarterback, or do you not have anything like that in your repertoire? And that's what we're looking for here. So you'll see, this is sorted by floor right now. So you'll see Carson Beck has the highest floor of any quarterback in this draft class. Now that's not saying much because it's not a great draft class or anything like that, but he has the highest floor. Now you'll also notice, if you're looking at the screen, he has one of the lowest ceilings, and in fact, I think he has the second lowest ceiling of any of any player or any QB, I should say, on here. So obviously, when we're looking at the combination, it doesn't really add up to anything amazing. But it's saying he's a very safe player. Like the NFL is probably going to look at him and say he can be a backup. He can be an NFL backup. He can be someone that we look at and say he could not lose us a game if our quarterback goes down or something like that. But obviously, we're not going to ever ask Carson Beck to go out and win us a game. He can't even do that in college. We're not going to do that in the NFL either. You look at Fernando Mendoza, now the second highest floor, which is nice to see because obviously we want Mendoza to do well and everything. But now you're starting to see the ceiling. He has the high or one of the higher ceilings in this class, but not the highest because obviously there's players that do more. They obviously just have lower floors. But there's people like Taylor Green over here, 34% floor. That's where you start getting into the Anthony Richardson level of player where you're looking at the ceiling. You're saying like this guy's an uber athlete. He has all he has the rushing ability and everything that we want to see, but he doesn't push the ball down the field. He doesn't have the big time throw rate. He definitely doesn't have the completion rate or anything like that you like to see. He doesn't have the floor. Unfortunately, he's just not going to be an NFL QB. And so that's why we can say, like, this is someone that maybe you draft in the third, fourth round, but you don't get uber excited about Taylor Green because he went out and broke every freaking metric or every I want to say metric, but it's not the right word. But
testing.
Testing. Thank you. He broke every
yeah.
test at the combine, and just because of that, don't fall in love with him. Don't do the Anthony Richardson thing over again. So I've talked a lot. We'll get into the other the other positions as well. But Andy, what are you noticing here? What do you think of the tool and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah. So it was hard for me to understand at first, but thank you for breaking that down. I think I get it now. The first thing that jumps out is obviously the two guys at the end there with their ceilings, Ethan Kaliakmanis and Tommy Castellanos, with the high above 70% ceiling, and obviously that's tempered by the extremely low floor. And I think that's obvious. I know that your system, Beth, puts a very high weighted average for intended air yards, and both of those guys were around 12, maybe for their career, definitely around 11 for their career, but 12 last year for sure. But that's obviously in Kaliakmanis's case held down for me by a QBR under 70. I don't know what Tommy Castellanos' QBR was, but I would imagine it was probably better than that. But also, he's got size concerns and a few other things. So, and also draft capital is probably not going to be what you want it to be for those guys either. He was right around 70 as well. So that's also not what you want to see, for me anyway, for an NFL quarterback. I know that there are instances where those do hit, but I think those are guys, though. They're athletic. They throw the ball around. They're the type of guys that will probably earn a backup role somewhere, even being like day 3 or potentially even undrafted free agents, just because of that arm talent and not being afraid to be a little bit of a risk taker. And they've both played long enough, especially in Kaliakmanis's case and Tommy Castellanos. Honestly, they've both started essentially three seasons, so they've got a ton of college experience as a starter in Power 4 programs. They're probably going to get a really good look on an NFL roster. So these are the guys that you might want to be looking at in your 4th round of rookie drafts because they are going to get those priority backup opportunities. And I think the other thing that sticks out is just maybe Fernando Mendoza, despite being the 101 of NFL drafts, mock drafts, and a 10, let's say top 3 in consensus for rookie drafts right now, maybe isn't the safest quarterback prospect with only a 68% ceiling. You're looking at maybe a low-end QB1 for certain parts of his career. but probably more likely a career QB2, which isn't, you talk about winning your leagues. Is that going to win you a league? Probably not. That's just going to fill out a super flex spot if you need it. But if you're already competing, you hopefully don't need something like that. And if you aren't competing, that's not the guy that's going to push you over the edge like a Joe Burrow or a Josh Allen would. So tough to really say what that means right now because it is a quarterback and that is a premium position in dynasty and fantasy football. But I think we've talked about it for weeks, for months now, that we would probably favor all three of the wide receivers that we like and um, Jeremiah Love, obviously, before we would think about picking Mendoza. I mean, you probably have Mendoza over Mekhi Lemon, but uh, aside from that, I think I would probably favor those other positions over the quarterback, despite you know us playing in super flex formats, which is obviously nice to have a starting quarterback for what you would imagine to be at least 2 or 3 seasons that he gets a good look. But is it going to really benefit your team and turn you from that guy who's picking at 102 to all of a sudden being a championship contender?
Yeah, and that's a great point there, with Mendoza. And I think that's the whole point of this thing is it's not just to hate on the bad players or the terrible players or whatever. It's a nice way of showing that stuff. Like you made a great point with Calic Manis and Castellanos. You're looking at that high ceiling, and maybe NFL teams will give them a shot because of that. Obviously we're expecting Taylor Green to get a shot, but it very well could be at tight end or something else because he's just not there as a QB. But then with Mendoza, the floor is great, 76%, and it's obviously it's out of 100% of floor, 100% of ceiling. So you can hit technically. I haven't seen anyone do it, but technically you could hit 100% of each one. But it's saying that, like, yes, Mendoza is going to be a quality QB in the NFL, I believe, but I don't know that he's going to be a game changer or anything like that. Andy, like I said, we haven't talked about rookies here in a little bit, and in fact, we had some new information come over with Kirk Cousins signing with the Raiders. But then on top of that, they basically have come out, as a Kubiak has come out as a head coach and said, we want our new QB to sit for a year. And then what they do, they went and got Kirk Cousins. So you were saying, hey, you probably have him above Mekhi Lemon. Originally, I did. I think the more we talk about it, you're talking about a guy that doesn't have a huge ceiling. He has a great floor, but now he's going to sit a year at the very least behind Kirk Cousins. A lot of people are saying, oh, it's only going to be a few games or whatever. I mean, they're paying Kirk Cousins 20 mil. And I mean, that's not nothing, and that's not nothing, depending on how you look at it for the NFL. But I feel like when you listen to the words that they're saying, and then you just look at what they've done and look where the money has gone, it seems like Kirk Cousins is going to start this year and start a lot of games this year. And so at that point, yes, we know QBs hold their value. Like that's one of the nice things about drafting QBs is like even if they sit for a year, do whatever, they'll still have value, and that's not going to change. But I'd probably be dropping Mendoza to at least 105 and possibly even lower than that because of those reasons. And it helps when you're looking at this chart. Even if we reset and push Mendoza back to where he's supposed to be, if you look, it has elite, great, good, average, and below average, and that's not as players, that's as prospects. So you're saying, is he a great, or is he an elite prospect? No. Is he a great prospect? No, not really. I don't know if you can quite see the line there, but he's not quite to that great prospect line. Is he a good prospect? Yes. And he might even be one of the better good prospects, but he's not quite great. And so, I'm willing to definitely push him down to that 105 with the new information. But like I said, I might even be willing to drop him a little bit lower. And that obviously probably get more into team dependent things and stuff like that.
Yeah, and the other thing that I noticed is my boy Diego Pavia, not on this list. We talked about it pre-show. You said he is your QB4. I'm not seeing
He
him
is.
here.
I have no idea why Pavia isn't on here. I really don't know. 100% a mistake on my part. I'd actually be interested to see. I know his numbers. Like, all right, so the Skyline score is supposed to be a visual representation of Beth. Now, I'm not sitting here and going like the whole thing with Beth is you throw a bunch of metrics into it, and it spits out a grade, but that grade is 0.729, which means absolutely nothing to you or or to anyone, really not even to me, except for I've been doing it so long. It's like the Matrix with so like now I know, but that's years and years of practice. But a 0.729 or a 0.642 or whatever means absolutely nothing to anyone. This is just a better way of visualizing Beth, and that's what I'm using is the same exact metrics that go into Beth. I'm using to show the floor and the ceiling here. So Pavia is going to have probably a lower floor than a Beck. They really end up as the final score like very close, but he's going to have a little bit lower of a floor than Beck, but he's going to probably have a higher ceiling with the rushing and all that kind of stuff. So like they end up in a similar range. And you see at least in this representation, this visualization, like Beck and Simpson are almost tied, and you probably have Pavia like right around that same exact range, but with probably closer to the Ty Simpson split of the ceiling and the floor. I don't think he's going to have an 80% floor.
Yeah, no. Especially size and everything else going in there. And then the other thing that I guess, people need to, it's time to say goodnight to Garrett Nussmeier yet again.
Yeah.
But I've seen his name popping
30%
up as like
ceiling.
QB3 in this class and stuff like that. Not that that would even mean anything, but let's just be done with it. I mean, his name, I don't know how it just keeps popping up. Like I said, we need to just be done with this rookie class. Like, people are just like, oh, what about Garrett Nussmeier? He was supposed to be the 101 8 months ago, but yeah.
That's all it is. It's just name recognition. Like there's still people saying Quinn Ewers is going to be a thing when he got drafted to the Dolphins, and then like he had that like one okay game where he had like 200 yards passing or something at the end of the season, and people are like, see, well, what happened? He got replaced by Malik Willis like immediately because Quinn Ewers is not an NFL QB. This is the same thing with Garrett Nussmeier. Could he start a game? Sure. Is he going to be good? No. But obviously we know that the QBs are not the greatest in this class. So is there anything else? I mean, we've already mentioned most of them. Is there anything else that stands out that we need to talk about before we move on to a different position?
No, I don't think so. I think we're good with QBs right now.
Yeah, it's pretty ugly out there.
Yeah.
All right, so running backs is fun. Because what we're looking for with the running backs is, we have to look at a little bit of production, but, we've talked about it before where the production, college production doesn't really mean all that much. So even though I'm looking at production, I'm still looking for efficiency metrics for the floor. So you're looking at scrimmage yards per game, then you're looking at scrimmage yards per attempt. Then you're looking at receptions per game, your receiving profile. Obviously, then we mix in your BMI. If you have a 23 BMI, you're probably not going to see the field too often, or or whatever. You're not going to be a workhorse back. So I throw in BMI there. Draft capital obviously is important, and that's going to be for your floor. In the ceiling, we get into more of the combine metrics: your weight adjusted speed score, your big ton run rate, your burst score. And your PPR points per touch. So that's what we're looking at. What are you doing with the ball once you have it? And are you breaking big plays, or are you just falling down and getting tackled the second you get hit? Like that kind of thing. So that's what we're looking for with the running backs. So if we go here and if we sort by floor, everyone, and obviously Jeremiah loves at the top. That's not going to be a surprise for anyone. Nicholas Singleton is actually surprisingly at 2, which I was surprised by that just by just because of how we've kind of always felt about Singleton. But I guess the floor's always been there. We were just waiting for the ceiling to pop, and it never really did for the college level. But then we were saying, hey, he's going to pop at the combine. And then, of course, he wasn't able to play, or he wasn't able to do anything at the combine. So it was like, I guess he's not quite there. But then there's our favorite player, Emmett Johnson, at third for the third highest floor in this in this setting, but yet the ceiling is just not there whatsoever because there's no big time run rate. The PPR points per touch are so low, and that's really sad considering how many receptions he had. Think about it. You get a full point per reception just by catching the ball. So he's doing so little with the ball that he's actually losing points sometimes and things by what he's doing with the ball once he catches it, or he's catching it so close to the line of scrimmage like Andy's talked about in the past that he's catching the ball and he's falling down, and now you got 0.98 points instead of a full point because he actually lost 2 yards or whatever it was. So, floor wise, you have Jeremiah Love, Nicholas Singleton, Emmett Johnson, Jonah Coleman, Mike Washington, and Jadarian Price. That's your 60% floor and higher. Jeremiah Love sitting there in the 80% floor. So that's obviously what you love to see. Someone that's that high, you feel great about that. And then when you mix in his ceiling, boom, he's up at the elite level. When you mix in Emmett Johnson's ceiling, he's still below the average level for a prospect. So that shows you, even though they both have really high floors, that's where we can't get too sucked into one side or the other.
Yeah. I think the floor makes sense for Emmett Johnson because he does appear to, have some sort of draft capital projected for him, and he's got the name recognition, and he's got like this ridiculous statistical season under his belt at Nebraska, and I got to give credit to our co-host Aaron, who brought up David Montgomery when we were talking about Emmett Johnson, and Montgomery was marginally better from like a big time run rate standpoint than Emmett Johnson, but not like a ton better. And they're very similar in that like David Montgomery was never going to, bust off a huge 85-yard run in college or in the pros. But he obviously has had a very good career fantasy wise, at least for a few years in the NFL. And that could be what Emmett Johnson ends up being, just a guy who gets drafted into a situation where there's nobody else in the backfield, and he's got enough, carries under his belt at the college level to be an effective runner. And if a team feels, if it's a good team and they feel comfortable handing him the ball 15, 20 times a game, he's just going to score points that way, similar to what he did in college. But he's never going to be like a Jahmyr Gibbs or a Saquon Barkley or a Christian McCaffrey, a guy who's just going to pop off for a 40-point game in a semi-regular fashion, which you can expect for guys like that. But he could certainly just, find himself in a situation where, a team just gives him the ball enough times and he ends up having a low end RB1 or high RB2 season from time to time. I don't think that's what's going to happen, and that's why the ceiling is also on there, showing that visually that if he gets into a situation where has to compete with somebody for carries, somebody who's more dynamic, somebody better obviously, then he's just going to get buried and he'll end up like Tank Bigsby, which is the the other side of that same coin. So it'll be interesting to see, but he's got to be in the right situation to hit that floor, but the ceiling's always going to be so low.
Yeah, then you see basically our favorite player that we were just hoping, gets good draft capital and gets a good landing spot in Mike Washington Jr. 66% floor, but 90% ceiling with the the combine metrics that he hit, the big time run rate that he hit, albeit in his fifth year. We everyone I think everyone's beat that dead horse, as far as everyone knows now he didn't do anything until his fifth year. Then he had an amazing year. Then he goes and blows up the combine and looks like a man among men. And yet, we have to understand that, because of that extra, because of the fifth year, because of not really doing things, before, we have to understand the floor is definitely a little lower, but man, that ceiling is very nice. Although I will say, like, I think we talked about it when we were talking about Mike Washington before, a couple weeks ago, a month ago, whatever it was. Since then, I've really dug even deeper into it, and I found out more about Seth McGowan. And so we were saying they were both at Memphis, I believe it was, if that's correct,
New
and
Mexico
New
or
Mexico.
New
They were
Mexico
both at New
State, one of them.
Mexico. Yeah,
Yeah.
and they and yet McGowan actually outproduced Washington Jr. Well, the thing about McGowan is he was a high end recruit. He was a high end prospect. He obviously went and crushed the combine as well. So we know he has the athleticism. The dude was just had all kinds of off the field issues, and he went to jail. There's a reason why he's going to be 25 going into the season and stuff, because he was in jail for a couple of years. He had to put his college career on pause. And but it doesn't mean that he was a bad player. So even Washington getting outproduced, although they were close, it doesn't scare me as much as it originally did when I first saw that. I'm like, ooh, he couldn't beat out this guy that's 25 and blah blah blah. Well, now that I have a little more context, a little more information, I'm like, maybe it's not as bad as I thought. And actually, it makes me think that maybe even at 25 years old, maybe McGowan could be a sleeper that I really want to focus on in the later rounds. And we see with him, he's got a little bit lower floor because obviously he's older. He's an older prospect because of those off the field issues. Are those off the field issues going to lead to worse draft capital? Probably. He's projected to go much later than a Mike Washington Jr. But with that great combine, with some of the things that he's done, even when he came back, he still has the 67% ceiling, which is almost double Emmett Johnson's ceiling. So, we're seeing that if you can get a McGowan in the fourth, fifth round of your rookie drafts, this could be I don't want to say like league winning kind of pick, but like it could be a free starter, when it's all said and done, or at the very least a free flex play if McGowan lands in the right spot and it's not someone who's getting talked about nearly enough.
Yeah. For Mike Washington, I guess the 90% ceiling. I think it's probably a little high because now you're starting to put him in this great prospect tier, which I don't think that that's what he is. But it's possible. So I think that there is that ceiling because of what we saw last year. I just think that the likelihood of him hitting that ceiling is very small. Whereas like the likelihood of him hitting his floor seems much more probable, which the floor is still relatively high for him amongst these people, so it's not so scary, and he does have that high ceiling. So yeah, it looks like you've got him at RB2 here, which I can't say that I hate because I'm not. I have Jadarian Price as my RB2, but I don't love that either. So if you're gonna get a little spicy, then I don't hate Mike Washington as being the guy that you're gonna elevate there. And Seth McGowan, you know, I just don't see it. I know he had a decent year. I know that he outproduced Mike Washington and everything like that, but you said he's going to be 25 because when did he start? He played Oklahoma, in the 2020 season. He played the COVID year, so that was, obviously 6 years ago. And last year, was the big time run rate even really there? No, I don't understand the McGowan stuff at all, really. I think he had a really bad season at Kentucky last year. Even if he did outproduce at New Mexico State when he was there with Mike Washington improved his game. Seth McGowan took a huge step back. Yeah, he had 12 touchdowns, but it doesn't mean anything to me. It's kind of like Emmett Johnson. The numbers, like touchdowns are, anybody can get a touchdown if you're a D1 player in the right situation. So I know that's going to improve his PPR points per touch, but if you're looking at his big time run rate, and it was just all bad this year. Breakaway yards per attempt is a metric I like to look at for running backs, which was under 1 for him this year, which is really, really bad. So I'm all out on Seth McGowan. I'd much rather look at a guy like Katron Allen, who has had at least a couple of good seasons at Penn State under his belt. But I've given my feelings on almost everybody in this class beyond the top 7 or 8. It gets pretty ugly. So I think Mike Washington probably is going to fall down towards the end of the first, maybe even the second round. So that's going to be a value for a lot of people. But beyond that, I like Nick Singleton. I see him up there with that floor. Like we've seen the elite seasons out of him. I think I'd much rather take a chance on a guy like him versus, Seth McGowan, Emmett Johnson, those type of players.
No, I definitely agree with that. I think I'm just talking about, price difference. McGowan's probably going to go in the 4th, 5th round of rookie drafts, whereas, I've heard people saying that they have Katron Allen ahead of Nick Singleton still, or maybe not even still, but, because of everything that's happened with the combine, with him not being able to run, all that, they're like, I have to move Katron Allen ahead. And I'm like, I do believe Katron Allen is a good running back. He just doesn't have the athleticism to be a solid NFL running back. It's going to take the perfect season or the perfect team and the perfect fit. And even then, you're probably talking about like a Damian Pierce level player where you get like one season out of them, and then like Woody Marks or any other Houston running back that they've drafted over the however many years. You're going to get 1 year, and then they're going to get replaced, and that's what's happened like every single time. That level of player gets drafted. Damian Pierce, Katron Allen, Woody Marks, whatever. Yeah, maybe you get a year. And is that year worth it? Maybe, but it all depends on where you get them. But when people are pushing Katron Allen ahead of Nicholas Singleton, then I'm like, well, you're not even getting a good value. You're paying the premium, and and you're maybe going to get a year, and that's where I'm not as excited about it. But I'm going to move along to the lower levels here. Anybody standing out for you? Obviously you can see we have Kalen Black with, obviously we're getting into the low floor players. We're talking about 49% and lower, 49% Roman Hemby for the floor, all the way down to a 19% floor in Kanye Udo, which is obviously not very good. But we see a guy like Kalen Black, 44% floor, 64% ceiling. Adam Randall, 35% floor, but 64% ceiling. Is there anybody to be excited about here?
Well, you could take Kanye Udo off the list because I believe he went back to school, is going to Liberty this year.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I have him out of my actual ranks, but I still have him in the tool because it was hard coded in. So it is what it is. It's more for showing. Don't be excited about Kanye Udo.
I was a little bit last year, but maybe that's more of a call to caution for somebody like Eli Heidenreich, who also looked good in his Service Academy uniform, and now here we are. But I would say what sticks out for me is, Adam Randall is interesting just because he has a wide receiver background, kind of a big bodied dude who, if he gets drafted into a situation, they might use him just interestingly, like getting him on the field as like this big running back type I want to say like Cordarrelle Patterson, obviously, is the person who comes to mind as a converted running back. So maybe there's some interest there. I like Kalen Black, but everybody in that Indiana backfield looked exciting, so I don't know how much stock to put into it per se. Bryson Washington, I honestly didn't even know he
Actually,
was coming
Bryson
out in this
Washington went
class.
back as well.
Okay, I was like, okay, that
Yeah,
one.
yeah, Washington went back as well. So yeah, I believe everyone else is in the class, but yeah, Udo and Washington went back. Uh,
The well, the other one that I was gonna say is Le'Veon Moss, who is a guy that I was excited about coming into this season. He's had injuries, and then he had injuries again
a
last
lot of
year,
injuries.
and it didn't seem like whatever he had in the 2024 season, I don't think he fully recovered from it in the 2025 seasons. Looked like he was just re-aggravating things, and obviously didn't even make it half the season. But all the things that I was excited about from 2024, like a good big time run, really good yards per route run, completely disappeared last year. So to me, that's maybe either a lingering injury, or you know the injury was so severe that he maybe like the same thing in like a Jaden Ott case where whatever they had is now gone forever. But
Right.
the the one thing that I guess would hold on to is that 2024 season, and if a team looks at him and he passes his medicals and they say he's good now, and they draft him, that's a guy that I would consider drafting just based on what I saw in 2024. Obviously, I'm not spending a high pick on him, but there was enough there to get a little bit excited about, where I could be like, yeah, I need another running back. Who am I going to go for in the end of the fourth round? I'll go for Le'Veon Moss potentially, depending on what else is there, obviously. But um, Noah Whittington, I would probably also take a deep look at him as well if he's like a fourth round guy. He's just always been good. The problem is he's played forever and never really had like a full RB1 role ever. Even going back to like his Western Kentucky days, um, I guess you could say he was the RB1 there, but that team passed the ball like 80% of the time. So what was the running back one of Western Kentucky really worth? And then he goes to Oregon and never really secured any sort of like the I guess RB1 or prime role, whatever you want to call it. He never locked down like the market share that you'd want to see from like these elite prospects. But there's guys down here that you could like take some flyers on, but nobody to get really really excited about.
Well, yeah, I've actually been hearing a lot more Jaden Ott love recently, and also Damon Claiborne, and I don't understand either one. Like, I guess I kind of understand the Claiborne a little bit more because like he, even though he's small, he's supposed to be fast, but it doesn't actually show up on the field. It doesn't show up, in the games or in the numbers at all. Like Ott is sitting here with 37% floor and a 22% ceiling, and Claiborne is at a 21% floor and a 42% ceiling. So, yay, he's athletic. It doesn't show up in his game at all. And people say, oh, well, it's because of the team he was on and this and that. I'm like, yeah, you can excuse away a little bit. You don't get a 21% floor by being a great player on a crappy team. Like that's not how this works. So yeah, I think I'm out on both of those, but I've been hearing a lot of love for those players. I think Whittington was more of a was more of just like benefiting from Oregon and all that more than anyone that I'm going to be overly excited about. Although I will admit, in this down class, like Whittington still ends up being, I think my RB7 or something like that when it's all said and done, or maybe it's 8. So I don't hate him. I just don't think that I'm like overly excited. So that's going to be definitely another one where it's like the perfect fit is what we're looking for. But this is where we get into the exciting stuff. And obviously, now that we're this deep into the off season, we're in the draft month. Now everyone's starting to find their sleeper wide receivers that they're falling in love with, and everyone's trying to find the next hot player that no one's talked about. And so you're hearing about all these small school guys, FCS guys, and everything else. We have to figure out here, do any of them matter? But before we get into those names, let's look at the top names here. Does anything stand out? We've obviously talked about a lot of these players. Jordan Tyson, 92% floor, 74% ceiling. That might shock people because I know he was hurt, but when he was on the field, the things that he was doing showed that he has the floor. He's going to be an NFL player. He's going to be an NFL starter. That floor is there. Makai Lemon, 84% floor, 61% ceiling. So you see a little bit drop off, lower A dot, not as much of a route runner, mostly out of the slot, things like that. So you see a little bit of a drop, but not a terrible player. Just you see a drop in ceiling. Carnell Tate, bigger, slower than people wanted him to be, but yet still sitting there. Actually, he has the highest ceiling of any of the top three, only by 1%. So nothing too crazy there. But that's also including draft capital, where right now I think I have him at fourth overall projected draft capital, and I've dropped Tyson down. Not that it's that much, but you're talking about fourth overall to I think like 16th overall or whatever he's being projected to go right now. Casey Concepcion, 80% floor, only 56% ceiling. There's a lot of gadgety stuff earlier on. We saw 1 year of quality play, but he didn't break 1,000 yards. He didn't do anything like that. So we're not quite seeing the true ceiling that maybe you'd want to see, but there's definitely something there with Concepcion. Surratt, Cooper Jr. I know you're not a Jeremy Bernard fan. Denzel Boston, 62% floor, 46% ceiling. Not what we want to see from our starting stud wide receivers or anything like that. So, what do you think of those? Top 7 or 8?
Yeah, I guess I'm fine with the top three. I know that you've got your issues with Makai Lemon, and his ceiling, and I guess I'm somewhat with you on it. I don't know that his ceiling is that much lower than Carnell Tate's, but it probably is a little bit lower, obviously. The one thing I would say with Concepcion is I don't think the floor for him is as safe as you say it. So I would probably keep the tower the same size, but I would move I don't know, 10% of his floor into his ceiling, because I do think based on last season, he has shown us that he can be a good receiver in the NFL. But with that second season and the gadgety stuff that you were talking about at NC State, maybe the floor isn't quite as safe as this is making it seem. Interestingly, you've got Omar Cooper and Elijah Surratt very close, and it reminds me of the mock draft we did a while ago where I ended up picking Omar Cooper over Elijah Surratt, and I think the reason I did that is kind of reflected here is because they are similar, as from a prospect standpoint, which is why I went kind of back and forth on them. But I wanted it with Cooper because the ceiling probably is a little bit higher on him. So I think I would probably move him ahead in my rankings, obviously. And maybe that would just equate to bumping his floor up another 5% or something or whatever. But I think those guys are very similar, but I think Cooper does have that slight edge on the upside. And then beyond that, I just don't care about any of these receivers. I got to be honest with you. I know that there's, some of them are going to be good. Some of them are probably going to have roles in the NFL, but it's only because there's nobody else in this draft class, and teams are going to be well, we drafted him in the third round. We got to do something with him. But I just don't foresee any of these guys ever making nobody cares about the Pro Bowl anymore, but they're never going to make an all-pro team. They're never going to break any sort of reception receiving area. I don't think any of them are ever going to lead their team in receiving. So I get the Brendan Thompson ceiling because he is such a deep threat that could translate to something. Brazel is a guy, when we did our mock draft, I took him in the first round because who else is there? Which is what it came down to. But I am interested to see some of the names, I guess, towards the back end of this list, because we were talking about guys that really haven't been talked about, and Eric McAllister was a name that jumped up, and I don't. Oh, he's right there. So he was right after Malachi Fields. I think that's right though with the ceiling. And you and I were just talking about the off the field stuff with him, getting arrested basically as soon as he got to TCU for some gun stuff in a Whataburger. So that's obviously scary. But it seems like he rehabilitated himself and turned himself into a leader on that team. So hopefully that's in the past. But I really think McAllister could be the guy who ends up being like the third round steal in this draft class. Like, oh, a team has those red flags marked on their scouting report of him. He doesn't get drafted till day 3. All of a sudden, he's, a starting wide receiver wherever he's at and soaking up a ton of targets. So that would be the guy that I would call out as like, he's the one that you need to look at when you're in the third round, and maybe all these guys are available, and you're like, oh, well, Chris Bell, that was a guy who was popular early on last off season. Obviously, you hear a lot about Zachariah Branch, early declare. You hear about Skylar Bell all the time, and he led all of Division I in receiving yards. Ted Hurst, who's gone back-to-back seasons with 1,000 yards. Jacoby Lane, who had a great season alongside Mekhi Lemon. They're all going to go higher and probably offer you the same, if not less, of an opportunity that you're going to get from Eric McAllister. So that's what I would recommend, once we're looking down here towards the back end of this list. I'm surprised that Kevin Coleman is so low, because I know he's not like an exciting guy, and it probably has to do with his ADOT. But I really think that there's something there that he could just be utilized, and maybe that's like the Khalil Shakir of this. Like he's he could be like an eternal wide receiver 3. But there is utilization for that type of player on a roster. So Kevin Coleman, he's not an exciting guy, but I think that he might be like one of the guys that actually ends up having the better careers out of this group.
Yeah, and just for the listeners that aren't watching this, on the screen, these guys you're talking about. Once we get past Chris Bell and you get into Zachariah Branch, Dejon Stribling, Skylar Bell, Ted Hurst, Eric Rivers, Jacoby Lane, Kevin Coleman, and C.J. Daniels, you're talking about below a 50% floor. So, and then, even for the total, like Jacoby Lane barely breaks into the below average tier. And that's not for a player, that's for a prospect. So you're getting into the below average tier for a prospect. The same thing for Dejon Stribling, but then you get into Zachariah Branch, you get into the poor tier. You're not even hitting the levels that you're seeing with a Stribling or a Lane or a McAllister or a Bell. Basically, it's saying there's no chance for Zachariah Branch to hit at the NFL level. Even people say, oh, well, he's going to be drafted so early, you have to take him at some point. But he's being drafted for his special teams abilities. So this is an NFL player who's going to do NFL things for an NFL team. It has nothing to do. Fantasy football is a different game. And that's what, I'm not hating on Zachariah Branch because I don't think he can be an NFL player. Beth is a fantasy football tool, a dynasty fantasy football tool. It is saying, can you hit as a dynasty fantasy football player? And I'm saying, no, Zachariah Branch cannot do that. I get the draft capital, but it's for a different reason. And so it's going to help an NFL team a lot more. That's going to help you don't fall for the Zachariah Branch. But I definitely wanted to bring up Skylar Bell. I hear Skylar Bell's name over and over and over again. In fact, I feel like I've heard him talked about in the top 10. I believe, once again, I listen to a lot of pods. I believe I have heard him in the top 5 for some analysts. for wide receivers. And I get that this is an ambiguous class. I get that it's a class that people are confused by, and everyone has a favorite player and everything. But can you give me a reason? Because I'm sitting here looking at a 44% floor and a 29% ceiling. Can you give me a reason why Skylar Bell is supposed to be a top 10 or maybe even a top 5 player for people?
This is a good opportunity for me to explain why yards per route run isn't everything. Skylar Bell is a guy that had over 3 yards per route run at UConn, and for his career over 2. But that leaves out the context that he spent his first 3 years at Wisconsin and never surpassed 500 yards receiving. It also leaves out the context that he played 67% or yeah, over 60% of his snaps as an X receiver, but his ADOT is 8. What kind of routes are you running if you're not even doing 40% of your routes out of the slot, and yet your ADOT is still under 8? Like, not that I get too much into whatever you want to call it, reception perception or whatever, but it screams like you're getting schemed up in situations and stuff for a team like UConn, who does not play like a premier schedule. I get that having 1,300 yards and 13 touchdowns is exciting, but this is also a fifth-year player who didn't break out, I guess, until his fourth year, and is also, I guess the size is fine, but like, what is his position? What is he gonna be, a slot receiver? Is he an X receiver? I don't get it either. I think there's probably enough NFL teams who see those numbers and think we got to get this guy on our team, but it could end up bouncing back in your face like a Sky Moore type situation, just because he's a guy that really produced at a high volume for a lower tier program, and he didn't like do it in a very exciting fashion. Now, there's obviously always chances that guys like that hit, and really there's not a good way of predicting it that I can tell for these G5 guys. So whether it's Skylar Bell or Ted Hurst or Eric, I guess Eric Rivers played for Georgia Tech last year, but which one of those guys, if any of them, end up being the one that ends up getting a role and starting on a team, it's hard for me to say I favor or am looking at one over the other, because it's really hard to say which one of those guys that a team is going to fall in love with.
Yeah, and with these floors, like when you're setting the 40% for your Branch, Stribling, Bell, Ted Hurst, Eric Rivers, Jacoby Lane, Kevin Coleman, I do think these players will be NFL players. Like, I think that they will be on NFL teams, but you're probably talking more wide receiver fours, and like you're hoping they're going to break into be a wide receiver 3. I mentioned Khalil Shakir before, like that's probably kind of the range that you're hoping for. Like, can you be a wide receiver 3 that somehow gets pushed up to wide receiver 1 because there's no one else on the team, like that kind of thing. That would be like the goal, but that's kind of what you're hoping for here. I've heard a lot about Stribling lately. I've heard a lot about Lane, and you see, even though they have the lower floors, 46% and 42% respectively, we do see the highest ceilings out of anybody that we're talked about here, except for Eric McAllister, which we've already talked about, substantially over the past year or so. And if you want to talk about McAllister more, you can, obviously. But how are you feeling about Stribling and Lane? Because I feel like those are two players that I'm hearing more and more about as people are finding out who these players are. People are trying to find the sleepers and mention all the names and all that stuff. Is there any reason for these below average category players should be, but we see a little higher ceiling? I mean, Jacoby Lane's young, so that's one thing we can put into his corner. Stribling not so much, but Stribling has done more, so we can say that there's definitely some excitement to see with these players. But is the floor too low to be overly excited, or are these players that you're going to be trying to look at in the third, fourth rounds of your rookie drafts?
Stribling, I'll just tell you right now, I don't think he's good at all. He was a guy that I was excited about when he was at Washington State, and he had every opportunity to be a good wide receiver prospect there. He was on the field all the time. He ran over 400 routes in 2021 and 2022. Never the most yards he got in a season was 600. And then he bounced around, went to Oklahoma State, did nothing again in 2023 because he didn't see the field. He transferred. He went from running 400 routes to running 100 routes. And then finally in 2024, they gave him a little bit more of an opportunity. And then, he starts to turn his career around. But I'm not going to forget what happened at Washington State, like this air raid team that threw the ball a million times. He's out there and he's not earning any targets. And I know you could say, well, he was younger then, but like that's what matters. He wasn't breaking out when he was given those opportunities in his freshman and sophomore seasons, and then he completely fell off in his junior year. Finally, starts to put it together in 2024, and then moves to Ole Miss last season. Kind of replicates, I guess, what he did in 2024, but also the ADOT dropped a little bit, which I'm not as concerned about, but I just don't think that Stribling is going to do anything in the NFL. Lane, I do kind of like because you saw more of that growth curve that you want to see with a wide receiver. There was no really bad marks on his resume moving up, and then last year I would say it was a good season. From a yards per route run standpoint, from a market share standpoint, it was fine. He's playing with Mekhi Lemon. I think that he could be decent enough in the NFL. And like I said, once you get past like the first 6 or 7 wide receivers, I just don't care anymore. But if I'm gonna pick one or two of those guys that I do care about, it's probably gonna be like a Jacoby Lane and maybe Chris Brazell, and obviously Eric McAllister. But beyond that, like it turns into a bit of a crapshoot. Then I'm not gonna sit here and pretend like I know one of these guys is gonna pop off. I know some people will say like, oh, this looks good in this guy's profile. Keep your eye on him. You could say that about just about anybody who's, these guys are all looking to be drafted in the NFL. So, but it's hard to say with conviction that any of them are going to actually do anything beyond like we said, those first 7 guys or so.
Yeah, I'm with you. I like Lane. I like the idea of Lane, and he's definitely higher than I thought he was going to be in Beth's rankings. But that's not top 10 or anything like that. So like, let's not get crazy. But then when I hear people talking about him and how they feel about him, I'm like, man, I think I'm just out. Like I'm not going to draft him that early. But he's a player that I think is young enough to where he could become something. You talk about the size, you talk about the speed, you talk about the age. He could become something, but it's probably not going to be year 1. It's probably not even going to be year 2. It could be year 3, and that'd be great. But I think the only other player that we truly need to talk about, just because he's mentioned on every single podcast I've heard, every single show I've heard, is Bryce Lance out of North Dakota State. I obviously people are comping him to Christian Watson, but I just don't see it. Like he's worse in every way, and he's from the FCS. Like he's not. He doesn't even have quite the profile that you'd like to see. And he's from the FCS. It's essentially like 1 or 2 years of production from, I believe, a 5th-year player. I don't know what to think, but like I don't understand what we're looking for. We're saying like he could become Christian Watson. Like why are we excited about Christian Watson anyway?
Yeah. I kind of like him a little bit more than I liked Christian Watson, actually. Like, Watson had, did he even really have a good season at North Dakota State? I don't, not really. From a yards per route run standpoint, it was great. 4.3. I think he was hurt his senior year. Bryce Lance, he did have back-to-back seasons. I don't know if he is fifth year. He might have been a redshirt senior this year, but back-to-back seasons of 1,000 yards.
Yeah, I just double checked. He's fifth year.
Okay.
I think he was JUCO. I think he was JUCO and then FCS.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's easy to compare them because they both went to North Dakota State. Obviously, they're both pretty tall. I think Watson's taller. They're both kind of speedy. They're both these deep threat type players that can take the top off of defense. Obviously, so I get the comparison. I guess it just matters, what team takes him and how he's utilized. But he's a guy that I'd be interested in if he does get day 2 draft capital for sure. More so than some of these other guys like a Deshaun Stribling that I just talked about, where I'm just completely out on him. Same Skylar Bell, like too much of a risk there. I think I would prefer a Bryce Lance just because, even at the lower competition, he was, well, it's hard to say, I guess, because Skylar Bell is kind of similar in that aspect. But I guess the thing that Bryce Lance has on him is that, that deep threat ability, which also one-dimensional but more valuable when it comes to fantasy.
Yeah, I was trying to look through because I know he was fifth year. He didn't go to JUCO. He was at North Dakota State the entire time. So he was at North Dakota State for 5 years. However, he didn't actually do anything until 2023. But he was strictly like in 2021 true freshman. He redshirted. He didn't play any games at all. 22, he appeared in 13 games, but almost exclusively on special teams. No offensive plays whatsoever. 23 played in all 15 games. He had just one catch for 7 yards all season. And then finally, in his true senior season, he breaks out for 1,053 yards. Like, that's yardage that we want to see from FBS players. Like we want to see your Jeremiah, or I'm sorry, your Mekhi Lemons, your Carnell Tates hitting 1,000 yards. If an FCS player is only hitting 1,000 yards, that doesn't get me excited at all. You better be, especially in your fourth and fifth years, you better just be absolutely dominating. And that's why I don't understand why we're so super excited about Lance. I think people are like in that senior year in 2024, he had 17 touchdowns, and I think that's where people are like freaking out. Like, oh, Beth does not use dominator rating. Beth does not care about touchdowns unless it's going to the PPR points per touch. That's the only time it matters. But obviously, it's getting heavily discounted at the FCS level. But when you start getting caught up in those kind of players with the touchdowns, that's when you start falling for the Terrace Marshalls. That's where you start falling for the Denzel Bostons and things like that. Unfortunately, touchdowns aren't sticky, and we shouldn't get overly excited about them. In fact, in 2025, guess how many? He had 8 touchdowns, not 17. So, it shows how unsticky, but yet he had more receiving yards. 1,079 compared to 1,053. That just shows how unsticky or non-sticky that stat is, or that's why I don't look at dominator rating. I look at market share. Are you dominating the market of your receptions, of the receiving yards for your team? That's the only thing I care about, because touchdowns, all that kind of stuff, they're great, but it's just they can be fluky, and I don't want to fall into that trap.
Yeah, 100%. Kind of like what I was talking about with McGowan earlier. Yeah, touchdowns are not a stat that should matter in any evaluation of a college player or an NFL player for that matter. Uh, there are instances, I guess, in the NFL where players are going to get more opportunities, and that's good for fantasy. But definitely, like projecting touchdowns to transfer from college to the NFL is that's just poor process, really.
Yeah. And I mean, going back to the Christian Watson thing, I'm just doing it because people are trying to comp him to it. I had Christian Watson as a prospect in Beth, looking at the same exact things and everything, a full tier ahead of where I have Bryce Lance. And I didn't even like Christian Watson that much. I was not a fan of Christian Watson. In fact, he was my wide receiver 14 in the 2022 class. So this was not a player that I was overly excited about. And yet, I'm sorry, he was my wide receiver 13. I want to be accurate. Tyquan Thornton was my wide receiver 14. But not a player that I want to be overly excited about or anything like that. Well, guess what? Bryce Lance is lower than that. Bryce Lance is actually my wide receiver 24 in the class. Actually, that's not true. I have tight ends mixed in. He is my wide receiver slash tight end 24. I would have to actually do the math. He's probably like wide receiver, I don't know, 19 or something like that. But so not overly exciting, not someone that I want to draft over, too much. And I've just been hearing his name over and over again. Bryce Lance, Skylar Bell, Ted Hurst, these small school guys. People are trying to like force themselves to fall in love with them, and I just don't get it. We are well past the hour mark, so we're not going to get into tight ends. I'm just going to ask Andy: is Justin Jolie the steal of the draft? Before we get out of here,
Maybe. I don't know. Depends. It depends on a few things. I don't. I like Justin Jolie, but I there was some things about last season. The same things I guess that you kept knocking Kenyon Sadiq about, where like okay, he didn't even have 500 yards and that sort of stuff. So
yeah, but you're talking about North Carolina State versus Oregon.
yeah, I hear you. I hear you. So the market share was probably a little bit better, but the yards per route run weren't good. Which for tight ends, I feel like I kind of care about it a little bit more because he's never even posted a season above 2. But I know that also run blocking is important to some extent, but not all that much for projecting into the NFL and getting a role. I don't even know how he did as a run blocker. Doesn't look that great, honestly. So I don't.
No, I don't.
I don't know.
I don't think he's much of a blocker.
Yeah, I don't think he's the steal of the draft. No, I'm gonna say no, definitively.
Ooh, damn. Okay. Well, I was hoping for better than that. I get it. I just think you know what it is, and it's not even that I'm overly in love with Justin Jolie as a prospect or anything like that. It's that the other tight ends have been pushed up so much, and their profiles are not that substantially better. That I'm like, just give me Jolie, and then it makes it feel like a steal. But I'm with you. Like it's not like I'm sitting here going like we talked about Eric McAllister. I do actually think Eric McAllister could be a steal. I think if a team gives him a shot, forgives the off the field stuff, and we unfortunately we found out that he has a Jones fracture that he had to have repaired from his pro day. So not great. These are not the this is not the start to the NFL that we were kind of hoping for McAllister. But I do believe that he can actually be a steal. Is Jolie a steal? No, but would I rather take Jolie in the 4th of a rookie draft than Kenyon Sadiq in the 1st? Absolutely.
Yeah. If I had to throw a name out there, and I know you don't like him, Houston, Tanner Kazile, guy who's had over 700 yards twice in his career. He's got 2 seasons of over 2 yards per route run. He's kind of big, honestly, 6'7", but I think that's fine for a tight end. He would be the one that I would say, maybe not the steal of the draft, but he's the guy that I would think of in the same light that you are Joe Lee, where I can get him in the fourth versus somebody else that would cost a lot more.
Yeah, and I'm not saying obviously you can get anyone in the fourth compared to someone in the first. I'm saying that they won't be that different. Like they won't be drastically different as prospects or as players, to the point of being like, oh well, I wish I had taken Kenyon Sadiq at 105.
Yeah. The other name that I'll throw out, and I know you and I have talked about him. I think I asked you about him in Beth. Uh, Rohan Jones for Arkansas. Nobody's bringing his name up. He's a yards per route run machine, to the point where it gets kind of alarming. Like, well, what's going on? Why is that number so high?
I So, and we talked about him. He's really high in Beth. I have not found any information about him even being in the draft or anything. Like he's supposed to be in the draft. I've not heard a single person talk about him. I just don't know. So I actually took him out of my ranks just for now. If he gets drafted or if he ends up on a team, I will add him back into my ranks. But it was almost to the point where I was like, is he an accountant now? Like I don't know. I honestly I just don't know. So I just took him out of my rings just to be safe because he is a player that Beth does like. So I'm with you. We're on the same page here, but just the complete lack of information on him leads me to believe that he's not going to be drafted at all. And so we're going to be hoping for some kind of UDFA miracle or something like that for him. And those only work out once in a blue moon. So.
So Sporting News has him as a round 4 to 6 prospect, but then the only thing written about his pro day was that he's a ranked CFL draft prospect. So
Oh no, that's what I'm saying. I mean, yeah, it's not great.
But
I
hey,
do like him. I just don't think he. Unfortunately, some of these players, it doesn't matter if they show out or not. If you're at the wrong school, you just don't get enough recognition, and you're just not going to end up on the NFL's radar. And if you don't do something by going to the Senior Bowl or Shrine Bowl or whatever to change their opinion, then it's just not going to happen.
yeah, I mean he's a weird guy, weird prospect too. Like a tight end who averages 26 yards per reception, probably
Right.
more of an anomaly than something that's sticky, as we say.
And which is why I just took him out. I'm like, I don't even want to look at his name anymore because no one else has talked about him. I haven't heard a single thing. He obviously wasn't at the combine. Your odds of being drafted are so low if you don't even go to the combine. It's like, I don't even care about you anymore. Like I said, if he ends up in some good spot, I'll add him back and we'll figure it all out from there. But we are well over the hour mark now. So, Andy, I'm not even going to ask you for words of wisdom or anything like that. I'm just going to say, don't take. All right, the skyline score is supposed to be a visualization of Beth, but don't take every percentage and everything that I said tonight as like 100%. That's what Beth believes, because Beth gets even more in depth. And like when I come to a final grade and my final rankings and everything, there's even more that goes into it. I'm trying my best to visualize, and showcase how Beth feels about these players. But like even Andy was saying, before, with Surratt and Cooper and everything, like they're close, but Cooper has a slightly lower floor and Surratt has a slightly higher or a slightly lower ceiling. I actually have Cooper ahead of Surratt now, in my final Beth grades, but they're so close. And so, it's like, it's tough, but I'm trying to do a visualization. I'm trying to show you guys like how Beth feels about it, but don't take it 100%. That's why there's also the profiles. That's why there's also the grades and the rankings and all that stuff. This is just one of the features of the rookie tools and everything that you can find at Dynasty Workshop. But I think it does a good job of showcasing that kind of stuff. And when you look, people are talking about Reggie Virgil. Reggie Virgil has a 16% floor, but he has a 66% ceiling. I get why people are excited about him, but I think that 16% floor is going to be the talk of the town when it's all said and done, and I don't think it's going to work out. So enough about the skyline score. If anyone has any questions about it, obviously ask me about it. Slide into the DMs. You can find that at dynastyworkshop.com. We will. I know Andy wants to be done, but we're not done with the rookies yet. We will be talking about the rookies more and more. And in fact, we'll probably do one more final mock before we get to the actual NFL draft and all that kind of stuff. I believe we've covered it all, and so I believe it's time to get out of here. See you guys.